They called it a conservatory, but the brick that remains on the hill outside Beulah Fork is schoolhouse brick. Coarse, dull, cheap. Wind scrubs the ridge as if to erase the last of it. The copper bell is gone. The ridge road is a rutted dark line under sumac. A foundation, 2 walls and a corridor that turns like a crooked elbow. And along that elbow, 47 doors with iron hasps. 47 locks blackened by fire, and then by time. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from, and what's the time in the comments. The name still reads through the soot where the front lintel hasn't fallen. St. Cecilia's. The ledger ink calls it St. Cecilia's Conservatory of Sacred Music, Diocese of Wheeling, Arkell County, 1893-1913. The county surveyor's plat calls it School and Residence for Female Minors. The Board of Health minutes refer to it as the premises and outbuildings of St. Cecilia's, which tells you that by the spring of 1913, they did not mean to call it a school at all. 47 rooms sealed under my hand, wrote Sheriff R.H. Alden on March 18, 1913, in blue pencil in the margin of Minute Book B, Folio 28. Sealed per order of Arkell County Board of Health for cause related to contagion or miasmatic suspicion. He underlined miasmatic suspicion twice, as if embarrassed by the phrase. The phrase repeats in the diocesan correspondence, then fades. By 1915, the Chancery calls it the former St. Cecilia's premises. The property was sold and then resold with a covenant in the deed. No occupancy of the 47 rooms of the East Wing until such time as the county physician certifies the hazard abated. No one ever signed that certificate. The keys were left with the Chancery for safe custody. The diocese sent a letter to Arkell County in 1922 asking if the covenant must be honored. There is no reply in the file. The room numbers were painted above each transom window. The paint ran and then burned and then ran again. You can still make out 9 and 27 and 44. You can't find 13. That is deliberate. Every older building like this misses a number for a reason, but the ledger hand has a neat column. Rooms reserved for instruction, 47. It is written 3 times, winter of 1902, spring of 1907, autumn of 1912, as if someone needed to remind themselves of the number, as if the number mattered. There are never 47 rooms in a school like this, not unless someone meant to make them like cells. The sisters called them practice chambers. The architect called them studios. The Sanborn map from 1904 calls them classrooms. The county assessor calls them small rooms of narrow purpose. The Board of Health calls them the 47 rooms. Once the event began, no one gave them any other name. It began, as far as the paper knows, with music. On Sunday last, wrote Reverend Aloysius Byrne in a letter to the Vicar General, dated November 24, 1912, our choir of girls achieved what I can only describe as a unanimity of tone, timbre, and bodily devotion that carried the congregation. They seemed to be taken up, and they were as one body. Their eyes were bright in the late light. You will be pleased to know that the rumors of idleness and childishness in our practice have ceased. He enclosed a clipping from the Arkell County Star, which is now brittle and brown and half consumed by silverfish. It reads, "Local girls' chorale astounds with pure Concord." The article mentions a metronome imported from Pittsburgh, a European method of instruction, and a new reed organ in the chapel gallery. It mentions the girls, moving like so many white lilies upon a hidden tide. The reporter did not attend a rehearsal. He repeats what the pews saw. He saw the girls as an instrument that had finally tuned itself to its purpose. The ledger that winter shows 3 purchases that the sisters had not made before. The first is Balmain Luminous Compound, 3 crates. The second is Lamp Black and Whiting, Misco. The third is 49 small jars, glass with tight lid, for night paint. The entry is made in the hand of sister servant Caroline, who died in 1919 of pneumonia in another house. In her hand beside the entries is a note. Winter work for the older girls to offset last summer's seed failure. Better to do this work than to go hungry. Balmain's luminous compound is a phosphorescent powder that drinks light and gives it back in a low green. It is not radium, not the mortal glow of watch dials that would later eat bones from the inside out. This was zinc sulfide, copper-doped, inexpensive, and considered harmless when kept out of lungs and eyes. It was meant for fire exit signage, safe lanterns, rail markers. The sisters took a contract through a broker named Bramhall of Arkell Bramhall Safety to apply the luminous paint to placards through the winter months in a wing that had been unused, the east wing where those 47 rooms were. The sisters kept the girls in their studies, and the girls kept their hands busy and ate better for it. This is reasonable. This is not scandal. This is how an isolated institution survives a winter. Dust, wrote Dr. Emmett C. Lathrop, a traveling ear, nose, and throat man whose scrawl is precise despite being written in a train. Dust in the air of the east wing, heavy and persistent. The child who opened the door and swept it shut left a tail of it behind her. In lamplight, the dust has a queer adherent property, as if clinging to hair. I advised ventilation and the cessation of use of the smallest rooms. He wrote this on December 12, 1912, to the county physician, who underlined cessation and wrote, "Order if necessary," then did not order it. The girls' singing improved. You cannot separate the improvement from the dust. By January, Sister Caroline writes of devotion. She writes of the gift of concord, which repeats with the insistence of a prayer. We have in this house the gift of concord, and to whom much is given, much is required. She may be writing to convince herself. The receipts show that coal was at nearly $10 a ton, and they could not afford coal without the winter work. In the chapel at dusk, the girls' eyes took light and kept it. When the last but one gas lamp was turned down to a spin of blue, the eyes of the front row still caught the color like beads. The sisters called it a pretty thing, like the way a cat's eye takes light. A coal hauler from Beulah Fork, who did not attend Mass often but came when the girls sang, called it a wrong light. "Don't write that down," said Sister Caroline to the coal hauler's wife when the wife told it later on oath. The deposition is in a court file from the spring of 1913, when facts were recorded with an indignity that facts possess when men of offices become involved. "Don't say wrong light," Sister said. "Say the girls had a lively light." The girls began to keep time in their sleep, which the Board of Health calls a curious symptom when it is written under complaints. It is not easily measurable. The sisters put them to bed and the girls' fingers tapped, as if an unseen metronome were tucked inside their small hands. The doctor who came from the county seat heard it in the dormitory and said it was childish fidgeting, and then later wrote that he had never before heard 20 fingers tap in unison. By February, 3 of the older girls had a rash around the eyes, which the county physician calls contact dermatitis, and probably from lampblack or whiting in the night paint. The rash was symmetrical and obeyed the boundary of the orbit, but extended in fine branching lines toward the temples, which is not what a contact rash should do. This is noted in Dr. Lathrop's hand with a question mark. By the first week of Lent, 2 girls complained that they could taste penny metal without coin placed on their tongue. A faint copper taste is a known effect if one works around certain compounds. The taste was present even in the chapel where no work was done. Sister Caroline aired the rooms when the mild day allowed, which carried that fine powder down the corridor, and later fed the suspicion that the rooms carried their influence out of themselves. That corridor. The East Wing corridor runs alongside the ridge, so it is narrow and a little crooked, because it was built against the land. The corridor widens at intervals to accommodate windows. The windows do not line up with the doors. It is a small thing on the plan, and a larger thing with your feet. When you walk, your steps do not divide the space. You count 7 and you are at door 6. You count 7 again and you are short. You learn to adjust. And then when you think you have learned it, your foot length changes because the corridor narrows, and your head tips, and you feel the mild disorientation of a steamboat deck in a wind. There is no trick. The corridor is simply built cheap and to the land's desire, but the effect is unignorable. And when that wing was full of dust that held to hair and lash, and the girls spent hours in narrow rooms where the resonance of voice built up. And this is what any musician will say. A small room multiplies a tone. You begin to see the problem. What Dr. Lathrop called hyperacusis, the strange sensitivity, was not uniform. Some of the girls could not bear the harmonium. Some of them needed every sound. They stood in the chapel at night after Compline and hummed until the harmonium's reeds chimed without a touch. Sister said it was talent. Reverend Byron said it was devotion. The coal hauler said it was a wrongness that would call and call until something answered. He said, "I do wagons, not theology," in his testimony, but he said it anyway. Glass plate photographs exist of the choir, 5 plates 5x7, labeled in the same hand, which is different from Sister Caroline's but feminine and precise. In the first, the girls stand in white frocks in 2 ranks. In the second, they are turned to the side and their mouths are open mid-gloria, and the light is from the left and high. In the third, which is the one that matters, the light is low and the gas lamps are down to ends and the pupils of the girls' eyes return a totally white reflection, as if the black of their pupils had been painted over in milk. It is a photographic artifact that any man who has taken pictures will explain. A characteristic of glass and emulsion and angle. It might be that. Or it might be that the photographer asked for the lamps to be lowered, and the girls held their heads exactly where the last light was supposed to be, and what comes back is not red-eye but white, which in medicine is called leukocoria and is not simple, and if it is seen in one child it is a problem, and if it is seen in many, it is an impossibility. And so the glass plate remains, and you lift it, and you see yourself in the black, and then in the girl's pupils you do not see yourself at all. The arch of stone above the east wing corridor holds without the keystone that should keep it. You can stand under it and count the blocks. There is no keystone now, at least not where it is supposed to be. If you run your fingers into the soot, you can find a straight edge where the missing stone was cut out, and you will not match it to any fallen piece. The arch has not failed. This is not supernatural geometry. This is a mason who knew his trade and spread the load in the brick beforehand. And still, every time you stand under it, and you think of that corridor and those 47 rooms, your mind insists you find the missing piece. On March 3, 1913, the vigil of St. Casimir, a storm rose at twilight and ran out over the ridge and dragged its nail across the copper of the sky. The girls processed into the chapel for devotions with their little winter coats over their white albs and their candles in hand without flame, because the wind killed them at the doors. Sister said, "We will pray without light." She writes this later in the deposition, and then crosses it out and writes, "We prayed." She does not want it to sound like she gave an instruction. She wants it to sound like prayer happened of its own. What happened in the chapel she describes as a corona. The coal hauler's wife says, a lifted light, the same words she used about the eyes. Reverend Byron says, a visitation of the patron, which is pious and insufficient. Dr. Lathrop, who was not there but came the next day to see the children with the rash and the tapping fingers, writes, electrical discharge and hairpins, gas jets, or the organ's metal might have contributed, and might give the phenomenon of St. Elmo's, which is known at sea. St. Elmo's fire does not collect on eyelashes. It does not describe little lines in the air, pale and cold, drifting out from the girl's hair like letters being taught to spell in light. It does not gather over the gallery rail in a pale bar that hung and did not move while the girl's mouth said, the litany. There are 6 depositions of that night. None of them agree. 2 of them say the girls moved as one body with one mind, and 2 of them say that nothing was unusual beyond a striking intensity. And one of them says she saw a cloud pass across the ceiling and leave its impression like an oilcloth pressed too long. The 6th is Sister Caroline's, and at the place where she writes what she saw, she writes instead, their concord was total. The phrase repeats again. It is the only phrase that does. By the Friday of that same week, the county physician ordered a quarantine. The premises to be closed and all instruction to cease until our office is satisfied, he wrote in a hand that looks like he meant it. He enumerated his reasons: rash, insomnia, anorexia in 4 cases, hyperacusis, unsteadiness on stairs, fainting in chapel, and what he calls nervous imitation, by which he means that girls will be like girls in a group and do what the strongest among them does. He ordered the east wing closed and the rooms sealed to prevent further dust dissemination or miasmatic suspicion. He borrowed the sheriff and his deputy to do it. The number 47 appears again, not only as the count of locks, but as the measure of the order. 47 rooms sealed, the sheriff writes. Then an hour later, 47 in all, as if perhaps a door had been discovered behind a door, or as if a space had counted that was not at first a room. The plan of the wing shows 22 rooms upstairs, 23 rooms down, and 2 small closets with no numbering. To reach 47, you must count one of the closets as a room, or something else as a room that ought not be a room. On the print of the plan there is a faint penciled music staff drawn by someone with a straight edge and a hand that could not help itself. The little rectangles of room are crosses on the staff. The corridor is the stem. Someone meant something with the number well before the sheriff counted it. The sisters taught the psalms in modes. They spent hours over scales. That winter there were fewer vegetables, and there was more practice. The entry that notes the purchase of the luminous compound is beside the entry that reads, Morley's chant method, 2 copies. Down the margin of the ledger that very month, someone wrote 47 in 3 short, downward cuts, as if keeping count of days. When the locks were set, the sisters began to place the girls out in homes, in the country, which means that they were placed with people who came to Mass and were known to the priest. The Board of Health permitted this because the diagnosis was not smallpox or scarlet fever or anything that they had a pamphlet for. They put the girls with farm wives who would mind them and let them rest until whatever fever of nerves had run its course. This is recorded in a list of 32 names and roads written in a neat hand and then corrected twice with pencil, as if 2 girls had been moved and then one of them moved back. 2 of the farm wives wrote to the Board of Health because the girls woke and went to the door at 2:03 in the morning. 2 wrote this without the others' knowledge, using that exact minute. They could not make the minute plain because clocks are not precise in a house where the day is the measure. One writes, after the whistle that makes the men stir, which is the steam whistle at the pump station up the hollow that blows just at 2, because the night man likes to remind the day man that morning is coming. The girls woke at the 2nd minute after the whistle and put their hands to the door and listened hard, and one of them, who was placed at Mr. Merton's on Turkeyfoot Road, began to hum like the reed organ that has been left with a heavy hand, and then stopped when the farm wife lay her hand on the girl's head. The other, who was with the Steeles on Old Pritchard, beat her hand once on the door. The farm wife says, the tap came back. She was ashamed of writing that because it sounds like a ghost story. She wrote it anyway. At the same time, this is not written anywhere official, but it fell from the coal hauler's wife like a slip of paper from an old book. The ridge foxes went silent, and the pump whistle came back just once at 2:08, which it never did on any other night. It was as if something at the station answered something up the hollow, she said, and then she shook her head and said, I do not know why I put this down. But she put it down, and now it is part of the pile because she placed her name to it. Reverend Byrne wrote to the Vicar General asking for a physician of the church. You can hear his embarrassment through the phrases he chooses. He is too proud to say exorcist, and too faithful to say that the troubles were of a moral nature. He writes, we have exhibited a fervor that exceeds our governance, and we request a man competent in both discernment and nerve. He names a Jesuit from Cincinnati who, he had heard, was sound in doctrine and indifferent to the theatrical. No such man came. The reply from the Chancery says simply, it is a matter for the physician or the schoolmaster, not the sacred tribunal, and suggests that the Archdiocese will send a school inspector in June if matters are not improved, which is to say, they were left to it. The sheriff's seals are a thin smear of red wax on the iron hasps. You can put your thumb in them now, and your thumb will come back suited but not marked by law. The iron hasps hold not because of wax, but because no one has pushed against them with intention in 100 years. The doors bow inward in a few places, and an animal has gotten under one and made a bed of lint and lock washers. The number 31 is better preserved than the others, and looks like a child's drawn on a slate, clever and a little proud, with a serif that does not belong. 31 is where the ledger says, "Voices matured," beside 4 names who do not occur elsewhere in baptismal or marriage records in the county. 4 girls who became women somewhere else or else did not. When you stand there at the turn in the corridor, the silent wing stretched out, you will think of the number 47 not as a count but as a shape. This is because of how the light lies, and because the corridor is not quite true, and because the rooms make their own note even closed. It is not audible. It is a press at the back of the eyes. The ceiling was lath and plaster, and above it, hollow, and between that and the roof, also hollow, and both hollows connected by cutouts for the stovepipes and flues. It is easy to imagine how a hum might travel along such a hidden belly. A pump whistles at 2 in the morning, and those pipes make a faint line of tone like a thread pulled tight and laid along the corridor's length. And human bodies are not immune to such lines. A man with certain temperaments will feel his heart miscount in a room where a low frequency has been set going. A girl who has stood every evening for months in a room the size of a closet and sung the same notes until the resonance has made her hair ring will go to the door at 2 in the morning because something inside believes the rehearsal has been called. There is an affidavit in which Dr. Lathrop writes that he placed his tuning fork against a girl's forehead and felt the bone carry the tone more cleanly than he'd known it to, and then found that the same tone in a different room made the child's fingers move as if she were marking time without consent. He writes this, and then strikes it through, as if deciding to be less fanciful. He writes instead, "Suggestibility," as if the human bones had not carried this world's notes long before the word was coined. It is important not to make devils of the sisters. Their letters are tired and good. They wanted to feed their charges and keep their jobs and make a show for the town who gave and gave back. They meant to pray honestly. They would not have chosen light that clung to children's hair or breath that tasted of copper. Sister Caroline signed a second deposition when the sheriff returned to verify his locks. In it she wrote, "We have ceased the winter work." She then added, and here her pen dug hard, "We have ceased it utterly." She gave him the last jars of Balmain's compound, and the county physician told him to keep one, which he did in his desk. And 20 years later a janitor found it, and opened it, and the old powder rose, and sat in the light a while, as if it had not learned in the dark the lesson of falling. The last night before the locks, Reverend Byrne held an ad hoc service in which he sang the Veni Creator Spiritus himself, because he did not want the girls to sing. He writes that the note hung strange in his throat like a bead, and that he worked his jaw and the note did not clear. Sister wrote that the girls kept their eyes down and their hands still, which is the only time any paper records the girls not tapping. No one writes what they heard when the locks were finally set. The sheriff could have written silence, but he wrote only the number again. In the weeks after the quarantine, the farm wives wrote 3 more letters. One writes that the girl under her care began to set the table with the knives and spoons, exactly equidistant, without a measure. She had not learned such things at St. Cecilia's. The farm wife said it made her uneasy to watch, because the distances were more perfect than her own hand could manage even when she attempted to use a string. The girl grew hot when corrected. The second writes that her girl began to whistle between her teeth without moving her mouth when the pump whistle blew. The third writes that her girl sat on the porch on a still day and said, "It is in the corn," when the corn had not yet sprouted. By April 1st, one of the older girls fell from the staircase at Mr. Steele's and did not rise, and her death certificate reads, "cervical luxation," and no more, and the Board of Health closed the case on a Friday, which is when they like to close things, and if you wanted to believe that this was not a contagion, but a season that passed, then this is the day you mark. The ledger at the chancery becomes thin. The diocese sent a man to sell off the benches and the organ and the glass, which went to a church in Clarksburg. The keys to the east wing were kept, the locks on the east wing remain, and the rest of the building burned in 1919 and again in 1957, and the corridor remains with its elbow and its drifting light. There is a final piece that makes a man sit down. At the county warehouse, there is a crate of items marked St. Cecilia's returned. They were returned from farmhouses after the placement. They include 2 folded tablecloths, a broken string of blue glass priest's beads, a music method stamped Morley, a doctor's tuning fork bent just a fraction, and a rolled paper that is not an official document at all, but a child's chart of days. It is a little calendar where someone has put a pencil mark on every day of that winter but 3. Along the side of the calendar, written in the right margin in a hand that tried to be neat, 47 days until the light. At the top, he comes by sound. At the bottom, do not open. The bottom is underlined twice. The paper smells of lamp oil and the tin cabinet's long, dull breath. You can write off a child's calendar. You can write off a coal hauler's wife who says a pump answered. You can write off sisters who see saintly coronas in dry air made mean by winter. You can write off a doctor who overwrote an interesting note with the safe word, suggestibility. You can tell yourself that 47 is only a number. Then you stand in the cold corridor and look at locks and wonder why a man underlined miasmatic suspicion twice. I did not go there at night to test the hour. There is no virtue in arranging for dread when the day's enough to divide you. But as the shadows came up the hill and fell into the corridor, something like static rose against the hair on my arms and stood. It is easy to make an instrument of your body in such places, and so I held the banister's cold iron and counted doorways to keep my mind on the ordinary. At the turn, a small bird excited itself under a door and battered at the crack and made the sound of a small fingernail tapping wood with a perfect rhythm that no bird would normally choose. I would like to say that is all. From the far end, by 44, the lock moved against the hasp with a sound of iron remembering iron. That is a sound any old building will make on a day when the temperature falls, and a man of sense calls it settling. The iron made it again, just once, with the exactness of an echo that comes back, not across space, but along a measure you cannot see. You can take your hand off the banister and lay your ear to the door. You can become like the farm wife, you can count. And there again, faint and made hollow by the lathe, someone tapped once, and you will be pleased to know that I did not ask who. The county keeps its paper like a person who has learned that throwing away creates its own hauntings. It is boxed, half-labeled, misfiled under old spring elections or tax sales, and yet when you pull, what you need comes up. Dr. Emmett C. Lathrop's paper is in a manila folder under Poor Farm Renovations, 1914, which is how a county hides embarrassment in another county problem. It is titled, In the Careful Humility of a Man Who Does Not Wish to be Mocked by His Betters, Notes on Auditory Hyperesthesia and Persistent Concord in a Group of Female Pupils, Arkell Cohen's Winter of 1912-13. He does not name St. Cecilia's, though anyone here would recognize it. He writes, In one instance, 30 hours after the cessation of vocal practice, I observed 4 subjects who could easily and without prompting begin to hum and breathe in exact time, with a metronome removed to a neighboring room and turned so low that one of my assistants could not hear it. He attributes the phenomenon to group habit, chastened by devotion. He adds in a footnote, probable environmental aid due to small resonant chambers and the known powerful generative properties of certain harmonics within dimensions between 5 and 8 feet. He includes no photographs, but he has drawn 3 rectangles and written numbers along their edges, 6, 8, 7 to 3, 5, 9. He has drawn a slash with the note, when 2 voices held F and A in the same chamber, interaction produced a beat that was felt not heard. He crosses out felt not heard and writes, noted on the skin. He does not mention light. He inquires into compounds. There is a paragraph on zinc sulfide, the Balmain luminous paint favored for quiet signaling and safety devices, and its harmlessness. except when handled in dust or in constant close proximity, in which case coughing, ocular irritation, and metallic taste may result. He quotes a circular from Arkell Bramhall's safety that I have in another envelope, with its optimism and its bad penmanship. Peaceful light for the darkest exit, non-injurious to delicate constitutions, easily applied in the home. Sister Caroline, in a receipt tucked between his paper and the board minutes, has written, "We requested that shipments be packed better. Dust escapes through the crude wood of the crates. The half-humor, half-anger of a schoolwoman comes through. Crates, not coffins, but not by much." 2 sheets later, Dr. Lathrop writes something he had the good sense to sink into the middle of a paragraph. Under conditions of nearly total dark and after excitation by gaslight, zinc sulfide can emit faint light for several minutes. I have observed on the eyelashes of subjects a minute line of glow after lamp extinction, sufficient to give the appearance of a bright eye to the fearful. And then, the white reflex observed in some pupils under glass plate photography is likely an artifact, though the coincidence of the effect on multiple subjects is against good luck. He knows what leukochoria means. He has seen it once before in a boy with a tumor. He wants to believe in artifacts. The Board of Health minutes for March include a statement by Mr. Ezra Bramhall, he of Arkell Bramhall, who was called to explain unsafe practices in the application of luminous compounds by minors. He tells them that he did not place the work in the school, that he only filled orders, and that the compound is not in any respect a poison, unless a little dust be accounted as such. He says, "My own boy got into a crate and came out like a fairy, and he took no harm but a cough." The words "like a fairy" are unlikely to do him good in a county where men cross themselves when girls sing too well. The sheriff's report from March 18th, the day of the locks, has a line he did not include in the official hand on the wax seals. In pencil on the back he writes, "Sound in the duct above the doors. Hands placed above head by my deputy could feel a tremble that did not stop. Felt like when a train is still far down the hollow and you can judge its coming. Nothing broke. No obvious source." He underlines above the doors. He does not evoke the pump station whistle. He is a local man, and would not write down a superstition that points to the men who vote for him. The pump station log, though, is plain. The night engineer, a man named Coyle who signs like a boy, writes on the morning of March 4th, 2/8 blow uncalled by me. Likely another hand on the cord. And he draws a little sketch of the whistle's vent and the pull rope and an arrow. He adds, 2 minutes after the hour, our practice is at the hour, only save for fire or fog. No fog, no fire. There is a blot where someone touched the ink while it was wet, and then drew their finger away. The blot is 2 inches long, and looks like nothing at all until you notice that it runs as straight as a ruled line. You go through enough paper like this, half confirmation, half retraction, and you begin to understand why every account sounds like it is turning its head to listen to something else. A letter from Reverend Byrne to the Vicar General, 3 days after the quarantine, is one long apology to God for not knowing whether a priest has failed if he allows his charges to become so fervent that an authority must be called. He writes, "I confess I liked the sound. I confess I prized it. I confess that I stood in the chapel door at the end of February and thought, if heaven is like this, it is arranged for music." He then writes in a line whose ink is darker than the rest, as if he went away and came back and leaned his pen, "I believe we have constructed an instrument where none was intended. I believe the east wing is such." He draws, as if to explain, the plan of the wing in a clumsy square, and writes the room numbers along it, leaving out 13, then writes harp, and circles the wing's far turn. He is not a musician, but he knows that a concert harp has 47 strings. He writes it down with a question mark. 47. He underlines the number, and then he makes a little stroke beside it, as if embarrassed by numerology and still compelled by the echo. He writes, "When the girls tapped in their sleep in the dormitory, the taps synchronized to the motion of the fire in the iron. I thought this foolishness. Then I tied a string to the hook near the east window, and it moved when the girls hummed. This convinced me that the house had become a resonator, and that we were playing it. I did not write such to the doctor for fear of becoming ridiculous. There is a folded note in that same envelope, unsent, addressed to the Jesuit in Cincinnati that Byrne had named. It reads, partly in haste and partly in distress, Father M., I ask not for rights, but for speech with someone who has seen fervor of this kind. The girls obey in their prayers without prompting, and if I hold my hand up, they stop in one breath. If I do not hold my hand up, they do not stop at all. Do you understand? If I am absent, who stops them then? He did not send this because he thought he was making a drama of himself. He died 2 years later of a fever in a different posting, and his paper came back to Arkell in a box and lives now where the poor farm business rests. From the farm letters, after the first 3 reports of the 203 wakefulness, there are others that do not agree on the time, but agree on the action. The girls turned their heads at once toward the east, as if something tightened there. One farm wife writes what she should not, because it made her ashamed to say such a thing. She kept her mouth shut and I heard her whistle through her teeth. The wife adds, because one must. She is a good girl. In the margin, a board man has written, hysteria, then struck it out and written, imitation, then drawn a line through both and written nothing at all. One piece would be easy to dismiss if there weren't so many little pieces drawing it toward them. Mr. Bramhall kept a letter book and his widow donated it to the Historical Society long after the man was gone and could not be made to feel things about it. On January 12, 1913, he writes to a supplier, Deliver Balmain in 3 crates to St. Cecilia's east door. They want late and want cash on delivery. Ship with the smallest jars known, the tight ones, for the ladies say the little hands are best for work, and children keep the paint better than any man when the day is short. The sentence risks a charge. He will not be fined for putting girls to work, but he will be thought of that way after the fact. He asks the supplier for a second kind of luminescent, the sort that is less green, more toward milk. That product is not listed in his catalog. He writes in the margin, radium? No. He has heard of it, the fatal light to come. He will not touch it. The girls kept something of the light without the compound, that much is sure. Sister Caroline wrote that in her second deposition with her pen digging hard. We ceased it utterly, and still the eyes show and the tapping shows. She means that the afterglow held, which cannot be if we are dealing solely with zinc sulfide and copper. A person bearing dust can be scrubbed and the glow gone in a day. She is not describing dust. She is describing pattern. She was too old to call it that and too young to call it diabolical. She puts a third word, habit. She then crosses it out and writes, gift, and then crosses that out too. From the Sanborn map in 1904, if you lay tracing paper over the east wing and you take Reverend Burns' foolish truth seriously, it looks like a harp drawn crudely by a man with too thick a pencil. The corridor is the neck. The rooms are the strings if you squint. The chapel at the elbow sits like the column. And the flues, those little circles dusted onto the plan, carry heat, and therefore carry air, and therefore carry sound across what the girls learned with their bodies for months. A harp has 47 strings. Someone wrote 47 in the ledger that winter 3 times with a downward stroke that makes the numeral look like a note. It is too much to be comfortable and too little to be proof. Do you know the experiments you can do with a reed, a glass, and a string? Dr. Lathrop writes in his paper. You can make the feeling of a tone cross space through an unlikely path. Men will swear that ghosts have called them when the air is like this. The phrase like this carries more weight than he wants it to. He has seen a child's fingers tap the pattern of the pangelingua without correction. He writes underneath in small letters that look as if he believes no one will read them. The fact of a child's obedience to a pattern can be called virtue in church or illness in a case report. It is often the same thing. In April, there is an editorial in the Arkell County Star. We urge our people not to give in to fear. The board has acted from an abundance of caution. The rumors of sickly lights in children's eyes are a fancy of the sort that comes over country people after a bad winter. In the same issue, beneath it, a 3-line box. Notice to farm families housing pupils. Any need for assistance, write this office. That is the entire apparatus of care. A box in the paper, a man watching for mail. On the back of the editorial, someone has drawn a little thing that would be cute if it were not so suspect. A figure 8, then another getting smaller toward the center until the pencil breaks. A spirograph spiral before the toy. It is the hand of a girl or a woman who has practiced resting her wrist on paper and moving only fingers and drawing the shape of a beat. Not the beat itself, but the figure you get when 2 beats find each other and insist. Out at the pump station, there was a rough-backed slate on the wall where a man had made a tally of what he owed his wife and what his wife owed him. Matches 2, penny nails 3, salt, the larger pan. In March the tally stops. In late March there are 4 small vertical marks and a diagonal through them. That is 5 in a prison. Next to it the word girls. The station master, who is not a hard man, wrote long after in 1939, when an interviewer with a works progress pencil asked him what he remembered. They made me nervous. That is, the thought of them moving as one lot and not in their own little ways. I worked in the war engine house in Pittsburgh, where they teach you that coordination wins wars, but there is a difference when coordination is put on a girl that should be her own. 203. I do not remember writing that in the log, but I hear it if I wake wrong. In May and June, the correspondences slacken. The Board of Health returns to typhoid and houseflies and a cholera scare on a hog lot. St. Cecilia's goes quiet, which is a trick that institutions learn. If you cease to be a problem in public, people will assume you have ceased. Reverend Byrne was moved. Sister Caroline wrote her last public thing in July. We have mailed the last of the girls to their homes or to relations willing to take them. And then St. Cecilia's appears in the Chancery Ledger only as an asset to be disposed of. The East Wing is not disposed of. The keys in their envelope are put in a drawer. The board resolves that the quarantine is lifted excepting the rooms in question until the physician's certificate is made. Dr. Lathrop is gone by then on the train to Morgantown to look into factory throat, and leaves a note in his casebook that glances back at Arkell without saying it. I do not know how to certify that something has been put back. I know how to certify that it has not. There is a note in Sister Caroline's hand, tucked into a hymn book that went to Clarksburg with the organ. It came back to Arkell in the 1970s when that church went modern. The note says, "We counted 47 to keep courage. We believed that number would run out like a string of beads. We believed that on a day the number would fall over and we would be ourselves. We were wrong." She has written "wrong" with such care that the G stands alone, as if she hates it. I find the girl who fell at Mr. Steele's. She has a name, and her grave lies at the edge of the old yard. Her stone homemade and her death carved in a hand that thought the shape of a 3 must be like the shape of a bird. The Steeles kept a ledger themselves, and in it is a line for the day. Hosanna broke her neck in the fall. It was quiet. She is with God. The name Hosanna appears nowhere else in the county. Her parents named her for a day. And so the line becomes the sum. Under it, in the same ink, is a drawing of a key. The key's teeth are not right. Kelsey Steele could draw a key. He has drawn 2 elsewhere, and they match the sheriff's keys. This one does not. It looks like a longer, straighter thing with fewer notches, like a tuning fork with a handle and one tine broken. He has drawn the broken tine on purpose and shaded it, as if he loved it a little more for the break. I do not know what to do with this. It is an unkindness of the human mind that it makes shapes where shapes are not, but it is an unkindness of the world that sometimes the shapes are there, and the mind has learned wisdom by refusing. There is a woman in Clarksburg, dead now these 30 years, whose granddaughter brings a box to the Historical Society that has been in their house since a move from Arkell in 1915. It contains a cheap harmonica, a kerchief with blood spots that have turned brown and then black and then into threads, and a slip of parchment with 4 notes written that do not belong to any chant I know. The 4 notes are staggered strangely, like notation from a French method that never took here. The granddaughter says her mother told her that the old woman could start a song they all knew when she opened her mouth, and she shook her head at the phrase and said, "I mean, she opened her mouth and you felt the song. She did not choose it." The granddaughter says she watched the old woman ease her jaw once in the grocery, as if it hurt her to keep quiet. After the old woman died, her jaw took a long time to relax, and the funeral man worked at it while her daughter wept. I do not want to make a pathology of devotion. I do not want to make a romance of illness. I do not want to say that the girls became a choir in a way that made them strangers to themselves. The words do not hold. In a box misfiled with cow listings 1912-1913 is a folded sheet that I was not entitled to. It is labeled in Sister Caroline's elegant exactness, "Rules at night for the older girls." It lists 10 items. 2 are what you expect. No candles, no talking. 1 is what you do not. If the tapping begins, lay your hands flat. Do not seek to join with it until Sister is present. Another. If you wake at the 2nd minute after 2, do not go to the door. And then, if one begins to hum without instruction, place your palm upon her breastbone and press gently so that she will feel her heart. The pointed gentleness of that instruction does more to make me afraid than any red wax on an iron hasp. I went up to the ruins again in the afternoon while the sumac leaned and the sky was the color of stove water. The corridor is cooler than the day and a smell comes up from it like chalk wetted and wiped and wetted again. There is grit on the floor where the boards burned through and the plaster fell. My breath shook dust from the rafters that look like ribs. This is me writing all the sensory notes down to convince myself that the bones and the dust are abundant and the rest scarce. At 31, where the clever serif is cut in, there is a faint engraving into the wood beside the latch. Wait for light. The cut is shallow and long and has been rubbed smooth by years and then roughed by fire. It is a child's wish or a grown woman's warning. Above it, another hand has drawn a rough harp, a triangle with rounded corners and a line of shorter lines crossing it. The lines are too few. The hand stops at 33 and then fades, as if the carver had run out of patience or had been made to stop. On the door of 44 there is a circle with a cross inside, not a sacrament cross but a carpenter's mark for a hole to be bored. There is no hole. By accident, an honest one, I set my palm on the door where those faint lines are and laid my cheek against the panel to look down the line of the corridor while I leaned. A bee blundered and corrected itself and a hawk wrote a line in the sky, and the train's thin edge of sound reached the ridge without its body. Then I felt the panel, under my ear, ask to move. It did not move. Something in it asked. The desire of it reached through me the way a note will, but with no note. Like the memory of someone calling you by the name you had before you grew. I left with nothing more than this and brought the paper back to the table and put the accounts in squares. The calendar with its childish penciled 47 days until the light is now in a mylar sleeve, the way archivists dress paper that slept too long. I measured the dates. If you start at January 15th, the day Bramhall's first crates show as received, and count 47, you land on March 2nd. The event in the chapel, the corona that was not, occurred March 3rd. If the child counted from a rumor of crates not yet arrived because hunger makes time run faster, if she got her fingers wrong once, or if the girls kept their own number because 47 belonged to them, then you arrive at the vigil of St. Casimir with something like a fulfillment. Sister Caroline had written, "We counted 47 to keep courage. When you are 36 days into a winter that is eating you, numbers hold like banisters." I found in Dr. Lathrop's trunk, among invoices and a little framed photograph of a boy with a serious mouth, an envelope labeled simply, "Vibrations." The paper inside is delicate as onion skin. He writes, "Bone conduction unusually robust in the subjects. Mastoid process carries tuning fork tones for longer than expected. Rin test not reliable. Lit windows at distance cause minute changes in pupil before lamplight is turned up. Do they learn to adjust to anticipation of light, or some floor phenomenon? Under that, at 2 a.m., as noted by several farm wives, girls waking and attending door, likely pump whistle at station beyond the ridge, path of air from station to east wing undervalued in our first estimation. Fear caused by low pitch. Frequencies below 20 Hz cause anxiety in certain persons. See Tradesman's Reports 1909. Investigate. He draws a little wave and writes 47 and crosses it out, then 48, then not a number, a shape. There is something about his hand that grows less certain as it proceeds, as if a man who knew his measurements had entered a place where measurement made him a little ridiculous. He writes, tapping in sleep may be my fault, training too strict. And then, in a hand that looks as if he wrote in the train and the track bumped, do not put children in small rooms and tell them to make one sound. Do not. A rumor survived the paper, because paper also forgets, that a man came from Pittsburgh with a stethoscope the size of a dinner plate and placed it against the corridor wall and listened while a girl in a farmhouse 6 miles away scared her mother by opening her eyes at a dead minute and smiling with her teeth closed and whistling without breath. The rumor has no source. It persists because a stethoscope shaped like a plate is funny, until it is not. There are accounts of girls who married and put songs to their babies that put their babies to sleep too well. A woman told a drunk man in a bar that her son forgot to cry. The man said this was a blessing. The woman said the house got too quiet, and she put the clock on a shelf and the clock made her nervous. I would like there to be an end in the summer of 1913, with a return of appetite and the removal of the board's notice, and a new school built somewhere down the hollow with more windows and wider halls. Buildings should end when they are not good any longer. Songs should end when the breath does. But you do not get that. You get habits that make a woman place spoons at exactly equal interval without a string and get hot if corrected. You get a pump station man who does not admit to the second blow and still tallies girls on his slate. You get a sheriff who uses the phrase miasmatic suspicion because he has to write something, and there is nothing adequate to the dignity of the fear. There is one more letter in Sister Caroline's hand, written not to the board and not to the chancery, in pencil on the back of a hymn. It was tucked into the back of Dr. Lathrop's trunk as if he took it with him to remember, and then could not bear to throw it away. It reads, Father, if the gift of concord must go, let it go into the stone, and not into the girls. The stone holds, even after 2 fires. The east wing holds. The girls went into other houses. I do not know if the gift went with them, but I do not think it went into stone only. When you set a tuning fork and touch it to a surface, you can feel along your bones what the world prefers. It prefers certain notes. It refuses others. Standing in the corridor with that knowledge in the body, you cannot help thinking that someone either planned or discovered that the east wing loves a note near enough to a human heart to become religion to some and illness to others. I did not intend to go at night. I said so. The day has enough. The county has enough. The paper has more than enough. And yet there is a tendency in human thought that moves from record to test, from reading to touching. I did a poor compromise. I sat in the warehouse among cabinets and listened to the building itself at the safe hour of afternoon when the town is slow and the cleaning woman leaves at 4. The cabinets make little expansions when they assent to the weather. The old balusters from the courthouse creak a little. I put the jar of Balmain's powder that the sheriff kept, labeled "Do Not Open," on the table in the light. It is sealed. It has been sealed a century. It has no business with the afternoon. And yet, as the sun elevated beyond the windows and the light thinned in the room, I could swear that the powder shifted in the jar. Not bright. A suggestion like a fish under black water. I did not break the seal. That much I can give myself as a credit. I put the jar back and felt that small, embarrassed gladness that tells you you have done one sensible thing in an hour, when you were thinking unreasonably. A clerk from the county who leans on documentary sufficiency, and not on emotion, took a pencil between his teeth and said, around the pencil. It's just that the number 47 on the ledger is too much, isn't it? Then he spat the pencil out and said, "You know, the harp," and laughed at himself for knowing anything about harps. He shook his head and said, "I'm not the type to draw things to a point, but sometimes it is as if someone did it all on purpose, so that a pump whistle could have its way with a house. What unsettles is not that men did a thing on purpose, it is that a world permitted. The east wing was not a design of malice, it was cheap and to the land. The sisters did not want glowing eyes and breath that whistled shut. They wanted beans and discipline and a song warm enough to shame a town into giving coal. Dr. Lathrop did not want a case he could not certify. He wanted to leave a place knowing the stamp he could set on it. He left with a trunk labeled Vibrations. On the way out, I stopped again at the corridor. The light had turned. You learn the turns of it. You learn when the iron remembers its shape, and the plaster forgets and then remembers. At 2 in the afternoon, the pump does not blow. It is not a time the station has a reason for. And still on the days I have been, at the second minute after the hour, some small thing corrects itself. A bend of a long, still piece of something. A little settling of intent. It is enough to be ashamed of to say such a thing. You tell yourself you noticed because you were primed to notice. You tell yourself your watch is wrong, or you heard a rail line in the distance. Then, at 5 minutes later, again the same small correction. Not loud. Not the iron against iron that hints of men. Just something coming to a point you didn't know was drawn. Back in the warehouse, I found the boards printed, "Notice of quarantine lifted excepting East Wing," dated May 9th, 1913. It is a grand little card with its Latin motto at the top and its unmusical prose. It says, "The premises of the former St. Cecilia's are suitable for occupation, with the exception of those rooms which we term the 47, until such time as the county physician certifies the hazard abated. The hazard in question being of no named contagion, but of an uncertainty which is as yet not at rest." They printed uncertainty. They signed it and sealed it, and it stands like a philosophy. Hazard of uncertainty. A county will endure most anything except a thing that will not be named. After that card, the paper thins. There is less to hold. The rest lies in the corridor and in the houses farther from the road where faces kept a small light longer than a winter, and in a jar one should not open, and in a little drawing of a harp on a door where a clever child put a serif on a number and kept her figures. It lies in the way a tune once made won't stop making itself, and in the habit of girls' fingers tapping at a speed no clock keeps. A last piece from the Chancery. A man wrote in 1922 asking if the covenant must be honored, the one that requires the county physician to certify the hazard abated. And the Chancery filed the letter and wrote no reply. The envelope is torn. In the tear, a flake of wax red as a cheap berry. You might call this nothing. You might call it the residue of a habit that kept too long and died. You might put your finger to it as if it would be soft. It is not soft. The corridor is as it was. 2 walls making an elbow, a missing keystone whose absence is a fact and a story both. A line of doors with iron hasps, a number omitted by intention, a stack of air that loves a hum. Wind presses the sumac down the slope, and the sound runs the length like a hand on a single string. The more you handle the paper, the more likely it is that this is the truth of it, that what men built to keep girls safe and devoted became a device tuned by hunger, light, and an accident of length, and that it taught those under its measure how to belong to something outside themselves. If so, then nothing in that wing is clean of it. Not the stone, not the air, not the bit of lint under 9 where an animal slept and learned a rhythm not its own. Certainly not the room 31 where a serif tries to humanize a number. Perhaps not me with the jar put back where I found it, feeling the small embarrassment of a man who knows he wanted it to glow. At the very far end at 44, the lock made the sound iron makes that is older than our fears. A settling and a remembering. There was no hour to blame. There was no night to make the mind. The light came in a hard and narrow band through a broken pane and lay across the corridor like something marking out a staff. I left then, not because of anything seen, but because it is unwise to become too exact with an instrument that is not yours. On the way down, a woman in the lane closed her mouth on a tune you hear at First Communion, and she did not know she'd been about to sing. She pressed her lips to her teeth and went on with her basket. The thought came, not from the part of the mind that loves superstition, but from the part that thinks in numbers. 47 strings on a harp, 47 rooms sealed, 47 days to the light. The clerk's pencil tightened in his teeth like a man holding a small thing too hard. Across the ridge, a train spoke a thin word, and then nothing did. The Chancery's visitation notes 1911-1913 were filed under insurance. That is how a church buries embarrassment, inside a conversation about premiums. The visitation priest notes the East Wing as poorly planned but serviceable, then adds a parenthetical that does not belong to a man who thinks with ink. The corridor gives a strange effect. One feels pressed toward the elbow, as if the building, like a bow, wished to bend. He sketches a little triangle with a curved side. Beside it, a word, harp. An addendum initialed by the diocesan architect mentions odd resonances when the wind comes from the southeast, and suggests that stone lintels be replaced above several doors to correct minor settlement. No stone was replaced. In faint pencil, someone afterward has written, no keystone at elbow, load spread in brick beforehand, masonry sound, which is true enough and also does not quiet the feeling that an absent piece invites something to stand there and be the piece. A separate envelope contains a letter to Reverend Byrne dated February 10, 1913, from Dr. Levison of Wheeling, an ophthalmologist. He had been sent 2 glass plates. He writes, the whiteness of the pupils on plate C is not a disease in my opinion. There is neither uniformity of margin nor the asymmetries of tumor. It is likely an artifact of angle and emulsion. That said, the lashes on these children are burdened with what appears to be powder with reflectant quality. If the powder contains a phosphor, and if the meibomian glands are irritated by the same, the oil may distribute particulates along the lid margin in a line that catches light. It would give a false impression of ocular glow. Clean their eyes. Stop the irritation. It is advice. It does not touch the thing that makes mouths open at once at a dead minute. In the board stack, under notices served to religious houses, a thin paper in Sister Caroline's careful hand, titled, Examination for Sisters' Consciences Only. It is not meant for them. It reads, have I preferred concord to charity? Have I shamed a child for being unable to keep time beyond what a child's heart can bear? Have I demanded one breath to the measure because the sound was sweet to me? She adds a rule in the margin, small, like a later thought. Never press on a sternum except with love. The phrase looks foolish in the daylight of a government desk and has the dignity of a battlefield instruction in the way it implies what went on in that chapel. Girls held too long to one note, the ache of a sternum that needs to move, the warning a woman writes herself when music has become a law. There is a pamphlet from Arkell Bramhall tucked into a flap. Directions for the safe household application of luminescent paints. Its cheer is galling. Apply in a space free of drafts and excitement. In pencil, Sister Caroline has circled excitement, as if the word itself were a danger. In Dr. Lathrop's trunk, besides vibrations, a smaller folder, supplemental remarks not for publication. He writes, subjects demonstrate phase locking, tendency to entrain respirations and small muscle movements to external periodicity. Note that even when told to perform irregular taps, e.g. 5-3-4-1, several subjects correct their taps unconsciously to the nearest stable rhythm. Recommend removal from rhythmic practice. Sunlight. He adds, I have been told by more than one lay witness that the girls knew the pump whistle seconds before it sounded. Explanation, anticipatory anxiety, conditioned response. Alternatively, a train's distant approach sets low frequencies in the wood and stone, and the body notices before the ear. It is possible to live safely in the phrase conditioned response. to tuck every strangeness into it. It is also a way of naming a change that does not go back. A brittle clipping from 1928, saved by someone at the board. Post-collective ideation in rural communities. A talk synopsized by a visiting psychiatrist at the Arkell Grange. He speaks of ideas that, once shared by a body of persons, tend to persist as habits even in individuals separated from the originating group. He was talking about temperance clubs and rumor, a farmer's annotation in the margin, like those girls. The psychiatrist would recoil from the comparison, and then, if he had stood in the corridor, perhaps not. The Historical Society received a donation in 1976, a tin box with a lath nail bent into a handle. Inside, a schoolgirl's copy of Morley's chant book with interleaved pages of faint graphite. The graphite shows not music, but measures. 2, 201, 202, 203, 204, and so on, to 10. Marks beside each. Tap, 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 nothing. The hand grows more pressed as it goes, as if the child grew angry at the world for insisting on a minute of nothing. On the last page, a note. Sister says God does not come by clocks. Under it, smaller, He comes by sound. Outside the paper, there are people still who are willing to unbutton an old story. At the Merton place on Turkeyfoot Road, a granddaughter keeps a breadboard old and smooth as a stone. On its underside, gouged in a girl's blunt knife, do not open. When asked, she says her grandmother used to put her palm to her breastbone when the whistle blew, as if she practiced something sister taught that did not leave her. The granddaughter is amused by this and annoyed both. She demonstrates unconsciously a habit that makes her husband set his teeth. When the refrigerator cycles, her fingers begin to tap. I stop, she says, because it's not mine. Then she stops and looks at her hand as if she had taught it to behave and it disobeyed. She has a photograph, a small one, from 1948, a family in front of a truck. Her grandmother's pupils in the half-dusk of winter go pale in the print in a way the others do not. Light, angle, emulsion, artifact. A person can live by that. It comforts like a doctrine. A man who was a boy in 1939 says a woman in town could set the pitch for hymns with her mouth barely open, and it made my jaw ache to watch her. He laughed when he said it to the WPA man and then drew his mouth down in a way that says, the laugh is a fence. You can stay in daylight forever. You can keep your feet to business hours. The pump station is now a museum one Saturday a month in summer. On those days, a retired man with a hurt shoulder demonstrates the whistle. He will blow it at the top of the hour because children like that. He will tell you it is loud enough to wake a barge hand 2 bends down. He will touch the pull rope at the quarter hour to show that the whistle is sensitive, that a little tremble of rope can admit a breath of steam and the slightest sound will carry. He will tell you that in 1913 a night man wrote down a second blow he did not call. Then he will remember he is not supposed to tell that part, and he will say he is joking. He is not joking. You can hear the apology in it like air leaking. On a mild Saturday, the retired man allowed me to see the mechanism. He is proud of the whistle. The vent is polished like a thing men used to trust. The rope is modern and still the iron remembers the hand that learned to make the sound fine. Everything in the station is measurable and useful, and outside, over the water, sound lays a line down, and every house on the east slope touches it with a finger without meaning to. In the Chancery's sale papers, a list of architectural alterations proposed in 1902 and 1907 for the East Wing. Most were not performed for lack of money. 2 were narrowing of rooms 7 and 31 by 3 inches to better align closets. The language is deceitful. The closets were unaffected. Someone adjusted lengths. The new lengths, if you read them like Dr. Lathrop would, if you allow yourself this, put rooms 7 and 31 into ratios closer to the perfect 5th and the perfect 4th with respect to the corridor's length, if the corridor is your string. This is reaching. This is the kind of reaching that takes a man into numerology. The notation in the margin is the only thing that keeps it close to ground. 4. Improved tone in practice rooms. written in a hand that belonged to a cheap, honest contractor who called things what they were. You begin to suspect that a good sound was the aim and not harm. A good sound is as dangerous as any devil when a house is hungry and a town expects. At the county warehouse, a working custodian said his partner refused to stay past 2, favoring a smoke outside, because the furniture makes a noise like a crowd thinking. It is a crude phrase and exactly right. Paper has a sound at that hour, like small decisions being made. I had a key on loan, one of the unnumbered keys, to the west rooms without any board prohibition. It fits nothing in the east wing, and I did not test it there. The sheriff's ring has gone to a drawer in his successor's office, and the wax that was once fresh is brittle, black, and vain. Any man can pry iron with a bar. I could have done this. I did not. You cannot put a county's restraint aside because you are curious, or because you are asked by a tired wing to take its music apart. In Visitation Notes, the architect's assistant sketches the chapel gallery. He marks the reed organ with a little box and writes leaky. He marks the gas jets capped R3 weeps. He draws a faint dashed line along the gallery rail and writes in a small, almost private hand, glow. He dates it March 4th, the day after the corona. He has dignified a story with a penciled line. He has made a miracle into a maintenance note. He may be a saint if saints were made of this. Not far from the ridge, a farmer plowed up a little jar of glass with a tight lid, cloudy with age. Inside, dust the color of pale cattail fluff. The farmer's wife brought it to the society in a paper bag with a laugh and said, "For your curiosities." The label inside is half rotted and reads, "Night paint." There is a temptation to open it and lay it in the sun and put the light out and see what lifts like a weak green breath. The curator placed it with the sheriff's jar and wrote in stricter hand the necessary, "Do not open." The scrap of label tugs at the hand like an instruction, and the instruction, "Do not open," tugs back. In the board's budget ledger, a note in red, "Expenditure for seals as to East Wing, St. C." The number is small, red wax is cheap, authority costs less than coal. There are 2 notes, anonymous, dropped to the Star's office in March 13, kept out of charity by the editor's widow. One reads, "If those doors are shut, who will stop them?" The other, "Does a lock halt a sound?" The second is somebody's bitter joke. The first is a question Sister Caroline wrote to herself, and then took back because a woman should not have to ask a town for what she cannot bear to put on paper. In June, a choir from another parish visited and sang in the old church at Beulah Fork, now emptied of girls. A woman attending wrote to her sister, "They were very good, but they were not ours. I am ashamed that I wanted the sound and ashamed I was glad when I did not get it." That sentence is as complete a diagnosis as any doctor's paper. There are darker pieces in the trunks of men. A traveling acoustician from Pittsburgh, he did factory testing, wrote to Dr. Lathrop in September 1913, "Sir, your note about the East Wing is of interest. A series of adjacent small chambers with dimensions around 6 to 8 feet will produce standing waves at frequencies a few of which in the right weather will be felt, but not much heard. The ductwork could carry this. Men in mills have grown sick by such exposures if prolonged and if they have not the constitution to bear it. The world is a drum when we build to make it one. It is not a devil. It is a mistake." He then adds, "Because he is a man who knows that saying mistake does not console a widow. Do not put children to work at night around dust that eats eyes. We do not yet know what we do not know." It is in this sober advice, that the world is a drum, that the idea of intention cracks. You do not need a plan for a harp. You just need a corridor, hunger, a contract for paint, a priest who loved a sound too much, and a winter that wanted to arrange a body. Yet the number persists. 47 remade into a habit, a gleaning of strings into a wing, a child's calendar insisting on light in 47 days. Reckon it all as coincidence if you like. It is a pile with a shape. After sundown, paper becomes unkind. The jar in the cabinet held its dust. It did not glow. A man is silly for attending to it. Still the hair at the arms stood. A neighbor in the next town, ignorant of all this, posted a notice in 49 about sheep gone still at 2 in the morning as if listening. The paper put it among small things, lost cats and church suppers. The next day, his neighbor came and said the sheep did it again at 5 after. The men laughed, and then they both kept watching their sheep at hours when men sleep. And the wives made a joke of it and then locked the doors earlier than usual. At the ridge, the sumac moves like girls lining up for a hymn. The doors hold. The locks remember iron. The missing keystone is a dare man gives to silence, and silence declines. I returned to the corridor on a day where heat lay hard and the smell of the plaster climbed. Near 9, between the sill and the door's bottom edge, a spill of something like old flour, not animal leavings, not ash. When the cloud passed over the high sun and the narrow band of window light slid, this pale powder suggested a faint lift, a suggestion only, like dust at a child's games. If you were minded to fear, you would say glow. If you were careful, you would say afterimage in a strained eye. Down by 27, there are scratches in the jamb at shoulder height. 4 there, then a diagonal. 5. Again 5. Again. Then 3. Then the carving stops. Counting days. Counting knocks. Counting girls. The grain of the wood has taken the scratches like a memory the world elected to carry. At 31, the serif on the number is still sly. At 44, a delicate noise, innocent as things go, like a filament relaxing when the current has been cut, though there are no filaments and no current. In the heat, it is easy to reckon that sounds carry farther, that the rods in windows and the legs of insects play. Then a small coordination. A line of ants along a crack turned at once, all at once, as if slack came out of a rope. 100 reasons for it. The body chooses one. That the world made a count and called. I had thought the worst would be in that wing. The worst lies where it always does. In the houses. I sat in a kitchen while a woman showed me a recipe and tapped a spoon, and then stopped, and then apologized, as if she had taken a liberty in my presence. She did not know what she apologized for. I did. A habit 100 years has not broken means a habit no number ends. That night, against what I had promised myself, I went to the station's monthly demonstration. The whistle blew at the hour. The children laughed. The retired man held the rope with the hand that isn't hurt and told a story about barges and fog. The town had come on the pretext of history and the real reason of a sound. On the way out, a man humming without knowing it, then stopping. A woman suppressing a breath and letting it go with a small act of will. The retired man said, "We have to test the automatic feed," and he touched the rope at 2 minutes and then 5 to see if the mechanism would admit a whisper. Each time the whistle gave a ghost of voice, nothing more than a throat clearing. Each time, somewhere down the slope, not near and not far, a dog interrupted itself and then resumed, and a person standing alone put a hand to their breastbone for the space of 1 heartbeat. I could not see them. I knew it like a thing the body knows before thought. Back at the warehouse, the jar in the cabinet had turned. It is absurd to write that. Jars do not turn. The paper's crease veered west when it had leaned east. The door was locked. I told myself someone had straightened it. I told myself this more than once. I put the jar back with the label facing front and closed the cabinet and thought about Sister Caroline's line. Let it go into the stone. If the stone holds, the stone lives under our feet, and the jar on a shelf in a hot room is only a little stone. Among Dr. Lathrop's, not for publication, a sketch labeled Harmonic Map, crude. The corridor is a line. Cross lines for doors. Above certain doors, tiny marks, stars. He has written letters D, A, E. Against 31, he has written F, and then written stop, and then no stop when conductor absent. He has written in parentheses what no medical man should without the refuge of anecdote. One subject's pupils widened upon approach to marked doors before any sound. Repeated. Possible acclimatization to anticipated light or excitation. He knows better than to write glow. He writes excitation. It is the same word tuned for a journal instead of a chapel. He signs the sheet with a small, hesitant flourish, and under it writes, "I have helped to mark this like a song." Then, below it, as if to rebuke himself, "No devils observed." Toward the end of his packet, on onion skin that has been sweat through by fingers long dead, a line that is too plain for a man of his trade. "Dear Sister C, if you keep the girls apart and in the day and starve the sound, it will not wholly go, but it will go enough. I am sorry about the one who fell. My fault was wanting to know how it worked." Then, after a space, a line that makes a man put the paper down before he reads it again. "Did we build a thing?" He has drawn a box around that question, and then shaded the box as if to hide the question from the version of himself who might read this later and not wish to see it. At the ruins, there are footprints. This is not romance. Boys go. Men who drink go. People who want an old thrill, who heard a grandmother whisper, go. Someone had pressed a hand where "Do Not Open" would lie on a jar's label if doors were jars. The soot took the hand and then blew away. It is no sign. And yet, there are wax smears on 2 locks that are not the color of 1913 but of a candle bought last year. Someone has placed a ceremony on a law that did not need it. Someone thought the wing required an extra seal, as if more red would keep something from starting back. The worst possibility is not a devil. The worst possibility is a technique, that someone learned from the accident of a wing in a winter how to set a body into obedience to a sound, that someone wrote a little score for it, that someone passed it to a cousin choir and made a boast of it without malice, that you could do it in any town with small rooms, a keen leader, and a hunger that makes children compliant. The paper offers no proof of a score. It offers a woman who could set a pitch with her mouth closed, a man who drew a key like a broken tuning fork, a doctor who mapped a corridor as if the building were an instrument, a priest who wrote harp and then went away feeling foolish, and a sheriff who underlined a phrase he did not understand. To take faith away from the thing does not make it less terrible. It makes it intimate, a technology of flesh and air. I can write this and hold to daylight and close the cabinets and return the keys. Then I stand in the corridor at a harmless hour and feel a paneled door ask to move in no language. I put my ear there. Fool that I am, after writing that I would not ask who. I do not ask who. I count. The count is the same count my hand made in a warehouse on the back of a child's calendar. 1, 2, 3, wait. A faint, unnerving agreement miles long. When the light goes at evening, the corridor draws a line across itself like a stave, and you can imagine notes thrown on it by a tidy, patient hand. Whoever carved the rough harp on 31 stopped at 33. The other 14 lines are in the air. On my last look at the day's paper, slipped between board minutes, a narrow, inexplicable strip, perhaps from a personal notebook, without attribution. We did not open the doors because we did not want the girls to hear themselves answer. Under it, a much later hand in ballpoint. Does a lock halt a sound? We have that joke already. It lands harder when you suspect the answer is no, and what you want a lock for is not to hold sound in, but to remind a town it chose once to stop making a sound. On the walk back, a woman with a basket closed her mouth on the first bar of a hymn and smiled shamefully at nothing. A tree of starlings turned as if in a schema. The pump station across the river, long quiet, gave one dry little voice as metal cooled. In that moment, in the place behind the mouth where a name lives, the taste of a penny came and went. Fire leaves a map a man can read if he minds the stubborn parts. The Arkell Fire Marshal's ledger for January 1919 calls the St. Cecilia's blaze, wind-driven from west structures toward main, gallery, and refectory, east wing with corridor-sustained smoke, blistering, and localized charring under lintels, no general involvement. The phrase "no general involvement" is precise and evasive. He lists curiosities, warped pew ends on the chapel's south aisle that appear twisted toward the gallery as if by strain, soot lines drawn thin along corridor crown, and 2 iron hasps on doors 5 and 44. Too hot to touch, though unexposed. He adds, almost as gossip. Witnesses heard a low tremble in the east masonry when the main roof fell, as if a train in the stone. He underlines, as if mocking himself for indulging. The insurance adjuster, 2 days later, writes a more practical astonishment. East wing walls show little fire, but interior plaster spalled in a pattern like a staff, 5 fine bars repeated, not rain streaking. Unclear cause, no water lines in that area. He reduces a stave to bars. Men in insurance are paid to do that. The rebuild never came. The wing remained, sealed and suffocatingly orderly. 47 doors, 47 locks, 1 absent number, the missing keystone, the elbow. In 1957, lightning found the chapel's bones again. The east wing took smoke and a robbery of its paint and nothing more. The fire report notes singular continual creaking, then with bureaucratic grace, likely thermal expansion. The deputies who came to push back boys with gas station cans wrote in the margins, "White eyes in pictures are a prank. Warm hasps are a trick of metal. Don't go telling stories. You write admonitions most when you mistrust your own stomach. If the world wanted to comfort us, it would end in ash. It did not. It went on. People married, farms failed, the pump station became a museum if the volunteer's shoulder held, and the corridor learned the small modern dust and mindless traffic of boys daring boys. The locked doors held their plain red blemishes and their blackened iron and their engraved jokes. Paper thinned. Then a folder from 1931 appeared under road improvements. Inside, petition to reopen the east wing for storage, signed by the Arkell Women's Aid. The board wrote back, denied pending physician certification as to hazard abated. 3 lines down, a note in a different hand, we have mislaid the yardstick. Someone meant humor or confession. Dr. Lathrop was dead by then. The county physician wrote, I cannot certify what I cannot name. The petitioners let it go. The wing had a patient's rights. I asked for a controlled hour. It was vulgar, perhaps, to bring a metronome and a tuning fork up to the ruins like making a childish dare out of a paper coronation. I wanted to be tender with it and still learn. The county allowed day access, without disturbance of closures. I took 2 clerks who wanted air, a custodian, and the retired pump man, because he could not bear a sound in town not to be present for it. We agreed on sunlight, on quiet, on nothing theatrical, and on open departure if any person asked. In the corridor I set the metronome in the elbow, case open, weight low, no bell. The ticks traveled plain 5 doors, and then became a felt thing, like the awareness of a spider strand. The retired man put 2 fingers to the rail and said, that is fine work, though it was nothing but a tick. I set the fork, A, the modern standard, not the muddy one the old reed organ preferred, against the rail. The rail carried it tenderly and did not require it. A house with such a long memory would not need a fork to tell it what to do. The clerks breathed and the custodian laughed and then, embarrassed, stopped laughing because his shoulders began to rise in time with the tick. I told him to stand to the wall. He did. The retired man smiled as if a joke had landed gently, and then the smile left him and he looked ashamed that his own chest had taken a measure he had not invited. Nothing happened. A corridor took a tick and made it a touch. We were bored. That was the mercy the day gave. Except that the metronome's pace corrected itself when a thin breeze found the turn. This is explainable. Air pressure, unlevel plank, old instrument. The correction arrived at an integer relation with the retired man's breath, the box's own rattle, and the minor cough of a swallow perched up under the roof. Things align in the world. You should not draw theology from that. And yet, standing in the elbow, there came a pulse that was not a tick, and it was nowhere and everywhere like a low engine behind town. For the space of 1 human breath, everyone's throat paused and then resumed together. And then we were ashamed the way you are when the body decides as a group without asking you. We stopped. We left. It was 1:47 when the retired man checked his watch under his breath. He kept the number to himself. Men toss numbers like that away so they cannot be accused of loving them. In the warehouse that afternoon, the sheriff's jar, "Do not open," sat, as it always sits, with its faded label like a toothache warning from another century. The custodian, who likes practical tests, rolled an office lamp across the table and let it sit over the glass for a quarter hour, while he filled a form for light fixtures. Then he killed the light. The jar's contents, century-old Balmain's luminous dust, lifted out a breath of color, pale, poor, a hint, like fog in a bottle. It was nothing any radium girl would recognize. No hunger in it, just a seed of green, and then the trace of green gone. The custodian said softly, not knowing he was repeating a phrase from a pamphlet older than his grandfather, "Peaceful light." Then, after a second, "Don't write that. I have written worse." That evening, the retired man said he had to go to the station to oil a hinge he had left squeakier than the board tolerated. At 2 all-iron the whistle should not sound on a weekday. He was not going to blow it. He was going to mind iron. He asked if I wanted to come because it is always easier to break a habit when someone else attends. I did not say yes. He went. There is a page in the pump station's modern sign-in book, blue lines, fat dates. At 1:57 that night, he signs his name. At 2:03 there is a straight line drawn down the margin, as if a hand had rested and then dragged. At 2:05 nothing. At 2:08 the word breath in his careful print. He was an honest man. I do not think he blew the whistle. I think he felt the station make a voice that was not a call, just an admission of the long habit iron can get in when the world around it has been letting a sound explore it for 100 years. There are notes in the diocesan architect's 1913 addenda that look stranger as they age. He writes, "Consider raising the lintel at 31 for light." Then, in the margin, in the assistant's sharper hand, "No, keep dark." Then smaller, "M." Someone changed their mind at the threshold. There is a temptation to assign to that margin an outsized dignity, that a man put his pen down to let a wing keep its dark. It likely was money. The last depositional piece I found that changed me was not in any box associated with St. Cecilia's. It lay under midwife reports, births attended 1915 to 1920, simply because a county clerk used that book as a place to store loose notes. The paper was folded down to the size of a thumb. It is Sister Caroline's hand again, careful as a dress seam. June 24th. M. Placed at Steele's, can whistle without moving lips. Stops if palm is placed firm on sternum. Will tap if left. Moves knives at table to equal distances without measure. Will blush at being told. Will cry if permitted to continue. Then, none of this is moral. All of this is habit. Pray for the unmaking of habit. There is a discipline in her fear. It is not theological. It is maternal. I drove out to the Merton place and the Steele's remaining foundation and the turkey foot turn at dusk, when the little bats cross at ankle height, and the road the pump men used is now half field. The toads rang in their wells and the starlings turned as they do, once, twice, coming to agreement inside bird bodies more quickly than any board of men. A scatter of houses lay like old dice. In 3 of them, as the hour went long and the window light fell exactly back into itself, someone's hand began to tap. Not a storyteller's flourish, just an old body telling off time it does not intend to keep, and then stopped when the body realized it was not alone. It is an intrusion to listen like that through grass. It felt like theft. I went home. Home is what I am not supposed to write. Paper wants me to be a voice with no breath. It is enough to say that when I set a spoon and a knife on a table now, my fingers try to keep them equal apart, and I make them wrong on purpose, and then I breathe, and it feels like I have doubled something in the room that cannot bear to be doubled. You can live that way. I would rather not know I am doing it. In the Chancery, 1922, the question of the covenant returned. the one that requires a physician to sign away the hazard. A junior canon lawyer wrote, with a precision that would have pleased his masters if they had read it. If the hazard is not a contagion but a condition, and if conditions do not abate but are removed only by alteration, then the covenant cannot be fulfilled unless the wing is dismantled. He underlined cannot. He might as well have drawn a harp. The wing stands. The board's uncertainty is still lettered on an old card. The law prefers names. The wing refused one. The law, finding nothing to name, left the door unentered and the wax unrenewed for a century. And then, last year, someone who had heard the story from a cousin came with a candle and dabbed fresh red on 2 hasps and made a sign of the cross as if something would rather have a mark than an open mouth. The urge to open is not devout and not skeptical. It is the same urge that made a priest write harp, and a doctor draw a map of letters above doors, and a contractor trim rooms by 3 inches to make a voice sit easier. The 47 locked rooms are a machine made by accident and then tuned by appetite. What is a story in a county's drawers is a repetition in the air. On a day unkind with heat, the county asked a structural man to examine the corridor. He wrote, "Spandrels spalled, lintels cracked, missing keystone at elbow is not structural hazard. Load distributed by brick corbelling. Recommend no one stand under elbow during thaw." He has done his job. He does not remark on the press a person feels there. He would not get paid if he did. He underlines corbelling twice. Men underline when they are tired. The Historical Society hosted a little evening of local curiosities, and because the county likes a penny for the electricity, we put the sheriff's jar under a lamp again. Children love a thing that glows when the lights go out. The jar did what jars do with old phosphor. It held a poor pallor, then let it go. The custodian held a paper behind it, and drew his name with the shadow it cast, and one of the women from Turkeyfoot, granddaughter of the Steeles, said too loud because she was afraid, "Do not teach them that." And then she laughed and said, "Lord, it is only dust," and put her hand, without thinking, on the flat above her heart. You do not comment on a person's hand. There are letters you read last. The traveling acoustician from Pittsburgh, he who wrote "The World is a Drum," came again in 1914, unfunded, just curious. He stood in the corridor and wrote a 5-line note. Could not in good conscience advise opening. There is a set to the air. The rooms are many little resonant boxes. Children could be taught to ignore, but teaching ignoring is also a lesson, and someone would teach the opposite later. If there is to be mercy, put away the keys. The board did not receive his note. Dr. Lathrop kept it. It slept in his trunk under onion skin, and made its way to my hands with a smell like old steel and linseed. The county clerk, the one who leans on sufficiency, said, "If you lay a hand to it and it answers, that's physics, right?" He said it with the bright belligerence of a man who likes the idea of causes more than he likes what they cause. He took the key that fits none of the East Wing's locks and held it in the corridor and made the small, ridiculous motion of a conductor with no orchestra. The air did not answer. The door at 31 did not move. When he stopped, a swallow in the rafters corrected its little bone, and the sound the swallow made lay precisely along the line of the clerk's 4 breaths and the retired man's hurt shoulders pop and my hand on the rail. If you stop your ears and remember what happened then, you find that it is not a sound at all that sets you back, but the ordinary world coming into such simple agreement for a second that you fear it will keep doing so. It did not. It let us go. We walked away. I brought back to the table the oldest pieces, the letter about gift of Concord, the calendar with 47 days until the light, the sheriff's miasmatic suspicion, underlined twice, the do not open on a child's chart, and again on a breadboard, the harp, written in clerical shame, the no devils observed, written by a doctor who feared laughter, the world is a drum. Set together, they make a clean story if you want to be comforted by causes. Winter, dust, small rooms, hunger, men who love to sound, bodies that learn to obey a measure. a county that declined to name what it could not undo. All of this would be enough if it did not keep asking, every afternoon at an hour that makes no clock sense, whether the corridor still accords itself when the day moves its light like a bar across a page. You do not go at night. And yet a person who has counted doors in the afternoon keeps the hour in his body, and the body stands up in an old house and hands go to wood. You lay the side of your head along a panel and you become a post in a fence, and you hear nothing but the wild, heavy things of wood and wasp and your own blood. Then there is a desire in the panel to move. Not movement. Desire. It is not a voice. If you call it a voice, you have gone too far and you will not find your way back. Sister Caroline wrote, in that private examination for sisters' consciences only, "Have I loved the sound more than the one who makes it?" Then she underlined loved and wrote, even when the sound was prayer. It is a fair question in any county. It is a better question at an elbow in a corridor that will not quit. There is a story that a farmer in 1972 lifted his boy in his arms in the wing and held him up to the tiny transom windows to see the numbers, and the boy laughed because 31 had a funny tail, and the father said, "That little mustache on the number is fooling you." And the boy went quiet and put his hand to his chest and did not laugh anymore. The story has no paper. It persists because men who deny stories like it whisper them anyway. I took the sheriff's jar to the archivist's table to return it to its shelf and caught my fingers wanting to shift the label a bare degree so the word do would be exactly centered. I made it wrong on purpose and it hurt like a mistake in a prayer. The jar went back. The cabinet's door shut. The lock set. The key slid across to the clerk who would rather not know why a person would be moved to adjust a label. Outside, the pump station stood in its neat museum stillness with its whistle's throat polished for Saturdays, and its rope hung in an instructed loop. A robin made a small sound, and then again, exactly the distance you would call a beat if you were tired and thought in beats. Over the ridge, the sumac leaned the way it always does in a weather that is chosen, and the corridor took that lean and made it a suggestion inside me. It is not that the girls did not heal. Many did. We have their marriages, some thin obituaries, a photograph here and there, a woman whose jaw ached when the choir began and relaxed when it ceased, a boy lulled too easy. The gift of Concord is not a gift when the music leaves and the habit remains. You make a life around a vanished thing. It is possible. In the corridor, the vanished thing's shape remains like furniture taken away that the carpet still remembers. A vacuum in the exact form of a winter. I wrote the piece of advice I thought the board should have printed a century ago on the card with the lifted quarantine. Then I put it away because advice belongs to a different music than a town that will not name. It was one line. If you must love a sound, open windows. It is nothing. Sister Caroline knew it and wrote sunlight in a doctor's margin. On my last day in the wing, I say last as if I were done, I stood at 44 because it has the iron the weather likes and the wasps die behind it, and the sound there carries like a thread in a shirt. A line of light fell across the corridor like a staff. Dust answered as dust answers, up and back, approving of itself. In the long quiet after my own breath calmed down, a tap came once, as unmistakable as a knuckle on wood from 31. And a second tap from 7 at an interval that leaves a person with a mathematical part undisturbed and the animal part turned. I did not say who's there. No one said anything. If it is a trick of wood, I am a man tricked by wood. If it is not, if it is the wing answering itself because a century's habit does not forget, then it is not my business to be more than a witness. There is one white thread more. The Clarksburg granddaughter found among her grandmother's papers a program for a 1920 parish concert. On the back, a hand, likely the old woman's, wrote 4 letters in a row, the same as on Dr. Lathrop's harmonic map, D, A, E, F. Under it, stop, and then parentheses. He comes by sound. She laughed when she handed me the paper because it is ridiculous for a life to be defined by 4 letters. Then she stopped, because she realized she could not explain why she had kept a grocery list from that same year that said simply, salt, thread, do not open. People make their own boards of health. To end would be a thing a story does. A corridor does not end. The wing does not end. It stays because the county lacks a name, and men who come to break open locks go away with a caution they do not want to admit belongs to them. I do not have a sighting to sell you. I have a jar no one opens. A number someone keeps and then swears is coincidence. A habit in bones. A winter in stone. A priest who wrote harp and then begged to be seen as sensible. A doctor who titled a sheet Vibrations and then could not publish it. A woman who carved a rough harp and stopped at 33. A sheriff who underlined suspicion because it is what a paper allows when a man has felt a panel want to move under his ear. There is an older county than the one with a courthouse and a ledger. In that county, doors are rooms, and rooms are strings, and winter makes instruments of us if we haven't minded what we've built. If you go out past Beulah Fork to the elbow in the brick where 47 locks look at nothing at all, you may find nothing. You may find wind. You may feel a pressure at the eyes like unshed tears. You may lay your hand to wood and find only wood. You may measure your flatware wrong on purpose for a month afterward without knowing why. If you were one of the girls, long gone now, or an old woman who learned from her, you may press your hand without thinking to the flat of your chest and ask the body to disregard the pump when it speaks. The rest is a county's refusal to open what it cannot close. If on the second minute after 2 you are awake and near enough to hear a whistle's ghost, and you stand, and you find yourself counting, it will be better for your sleep to choose your own number with your mouth. It will be better to remind yourself that habit is a law that can be broken by any kitchen tick, a clock, a faucet, your own nonsense tune. Do not test doors. Do not try to be conductor in a house that learned to play itself. 47. You can call it coincidence. The harp is a convenience for a mind that needs a shape. The locks are iron. The wax is hard. The missing keystone will not fall because a mason laid load with a good eye. The girls grew and put their hands on their children's chests when the old sound wanted entry, and nothing came of it that a town would write in a paper. It is enough. It is not nothing. Have you heard of this out your way? The rooms, the number, the wrong minute, the habit in a family no one can name? Would you have chosen differently, with a winter eating and a town expecting a sound?